The river flows, timeless, indifferent. For centuries, it has been a source of life, a highway, and a pantry for those who knew its secrets. Long before modern tackle shops lined our streets, long before graphite rods and monofilament lines, the frontiersmen, the trappers, the explorers, they relied on something far more fundamental: ingenuity, observation, and knowledge passed down through generations, often learned from the true masters of this land, the Native American tribes. Fishing wasn't just a pastime, it was survival. A successful catch could mean the difference between a full belly and starvation, between strength and weakness on a long journey. But how did they do it? Without fancy gear, often alone in the vast wilderness, facing conditions we can barely imagine? They used techniques born of necessity, honed by experience, and sometimes forgotten by time. These weren't just methods, they were testaments to human resourcefulness, a deep understanding of the natural world, and the crucial exchange of knowledge between cultures. From crafting hooks out of bone to reading the subtle language of the water, these skills were as vital as knowing how to build a fire or track game. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America. Today, we cast our lines back into the past. We uncover 7 forgotten fishing techniques that kept frontiersmen alive. These methods reveal a world where resourcefulness was king and the river yielded its bounty only to those who truly understood its ways. From spearing fish under torchlight to building intricate traps learned from indigenous experts, these 7 techniques weren't just about catching dinner. They were lifelines carved from the wilderness itself. Let's dive in. Number 1, the fire-hardened spear and the torchlight dance. Long before delicate flies danced on the water's surface, there was the direct primal connection of the spear. This wasn't just chucking a sharpened stick, it was an art form demanding patience, precision, and an understanding of light and shadow. Frontiersmen, often learning from Native American masters, became adept at spearfishing both day and night. The spear itself was often a marvel of improvisation. A straight, sturdy sapling, perhaps hickory or ash, was carefully selected. The tip wasn't just sharpened, it was often fire-hardened. By repeatedly heating the point in the embers of a fire and scraping away the charred wood, the tip became incredibly dense and durable, capable of piercing tough scales and resisting breakage. Some spears might incorporate a barbed point fashioned from bone, antler, or even a sturdy thorn securely lashed to the shaft with sinew or plant fiber cordage. This barb was crucial to prevent a struggling fish from wriggling free. Crafting such tools required skill, patience, and the right materials, topics we've touched on in our episodes exploring frontier tools. During the day, success relied on stealth and reading the water. The fisherman would move slowly along the bank or wade carefully into shallow areas. His shadow kept away from his target zone. He needed keen eyes to spot fish holding in eddies, under logs, or near cut banks. The thrust had to be swift, decisive, and account for the refraction of light through the water, aiming slightly below where the fish appeared to be. It was a skill honed through countless misses, demanding absolute stillness, followed by explosive action. But perhaps the most dramatic form was torchlight spearing, a technique widely practiced by tribes across the continent, including the Ojibwa and Cherokee. On calm, dark nights, a torch, often made from pitch pine knots or tightly bound birch bark, would be mounted on the bow of a canoe or held aloft from the bank. The light had a dual purpose. It attracted curious fish towards the surface, and crucially, it blinded them to the fisherman poised above with his spear. The flickering light reflecting off the water, the dark figure silhouetted against the flames, the sudden thrust into the illuminated depths. It was a scene both ancient and effective. The knowledge of which fish were attracted to light, the best locations, often shallow, clear waters, and the right time of night was often shared or observed from indigenous neighbors. While perhaps less documented in trapper journals than rifle hunting, Spearfishing was a reliable method, especially in clear streams or during spawning runs when fish were concentrated and predictable. It required minimal gear beyond the spear itself and offered a way to secure a meal when ammunition might be low or firearms impractical. It represents that fundamental connection, reading the environment and using simple, effective tools crafted directly from it. Number 2. The gorge hook and the patient handline. While spears excelled in shallow, clear water, angling offered a way to reach deeper pools or fish when visibility was poor. But forget neatly packaged hooks and reels. The frontiersmen often relied on ingenious, handcrafted hooks and simple, direct handlines. One of the most ancient and effective pieces of improvised tackle was the gorge hook. This wasn't a curved hook as we know it, but a straight or slightly curved piece of durable material, sharpened at both ends and notched or grooved in the middle for attaching the line. Bone fragments, especially bird bones, hard wood splinters, like locust or Osage orange, or even thorns could be carefully shaped using a knife. The principle was simple. The gorge was baited with insects, grubs, or a small piece of meat, so it lay parallel to the line. When a fish swallowed the bait entirely, a gentle tug on the line would cause the gorge to lodge sideways in the fish's throat or stomach. It required the fish to fully commit, making it less effective for tentative biters, but deadly once taken. The line itself was often crafted from natural fibers. Braided horsehair was common, strong, and relatively water-resistant. Sinew, animal tendon, stripped and twisted, provided another durable option. Plant fibers like milkweed or nettle could also be processed and braided into usable cordage, though perhaps less strong. The rod, if used at all, was typically just a long, flexible sapling cut from the riverside, a simple cane pole. More often, especially for portability, frontiersmen used handlines, wrapping the line around a small piece of wood or simply holding the coil directly, feeling for the subtle take of a fish. Handlining required sensitivity. The fisherman held the line loosely, feeling for the slightest vibration or change in tension that signaled a bite. Patience was key. Unlike the quick strike of spearing, gorge hooking often required waiting for the fish to fully ingest the bait before setting the hook with a steady pull. Knowledge of where fish held, deep pools, under submerged logs, near undercut banks, was crucial. This knowledge was often gained through personal observation or learned from Native American groups who had fished these waters for generations, understanding the seasonal movements and preferred habitats of different species. Catching a fish was only half the battle, especially if the catch was large or plentiful. Preservation was vital. Smoking was a common method, learned from indigenous peoples. Fish would be cleaned, sometimes lightly salted, and hung on racks made of green wood near a slow, smoky fire for hours or even days. The smoke dried the fish and imparted compounds that inhibited bacterial growth. Alternatively, salting and drying was effective, especially in drier climates. Fish were heavily salted if salt was available, a valuable trade commodity, and laid out on rocks or racks in the sun and wind until thoroughly dehydrated. In winter, freezing or burying fish in snow, cold storage, could preserve them for extended periods. While less dramatic than spearing, angling with improvised gear was a widespread and essential survival skill. Journals like those of Lewis and Clark mention fishing activities, though often focusing on the types of fish caught rather than the specific tackle. For instance, they noted on June 11, 1805, that Private Silas Goodrich, who is remarkably fond of fishing, caught several dozen fish of 2 different species. This simple entry highlights that fishing was a regular activity, even if the specific gear wasn't always detailed. The ability to craft functional hooks and lines from readily available materials demonstrates the deep resourcefulness required to live off the land. It was slow, patient work, but it reliably put food in the pot. Number 3. Weaving the water. Nets and weirs. While spears and hooks targeted individual fish, netting and trapping offered ways to harvest fish in greater numbers, crucial for building up stores or feeding a larger group. These methods often involved significant labor but yielded substantial rewards, and many techniques were directly adopted or adapted from Native American practices. Commercial nets were trade goods, but often expensive or unavailable. Resourceful frontiersmen, like their indigenous counterparts, could craft nets from natural materials. Strong plant fibers from nettles, milkweed, dogbane, or the inner bark of certain trees, like basswood or elm, were harvested, processed, retted, pounded, twisted, and painstakingly woven or knotted into functional nets. Sinew could also be used for stronger sections. Creating a large net was time-consuming, requiring patience and skill. Different types served different purposes. Dip nets, mounted on a hoop and pole, were used for scooping fish in shallower waters or during spawning runs. Gill nets, designed to hang like a curtain in the water, caught fish by their gills as they tried to swim through the mesh, the size of the mesh determining the size of the fish caught. Seines, larger nets with weights at the bottom and floats at the top, were used by multiple people to encircle a section of water and haul fish ashore. Perhaps even more ingenious were fish weirs and traps, structures designed to funnel fish into a confined area where they could be easily caught. This was a highly developed science among many Native American tribes, like those documented by Lewis and Clark among the Shoshone or tribes in the Pacific Northwest. Frontiersmen observed and learned. A weir was essentially a fence, often made of stakes driven into the riverbed, interwoven with brush or stones, built across a stream or channel. It would guide migrating or downstream drifting fish towards a deliberate opening. At this opening, a trap, often a conical or box-like basket woven from flexible branches, like willow, would be placed. Fish could easily swim into the narrowing trap, but found it difficult or impossible to escape. The design had to be strong enough to withstand the current and clever enough to outwit the fish. Locating weirs effectively required understanding fish migration patterns and river currents. Setting a gill net required anchoring it strategically across a channel or along a bank where fish were known to travel. Dip netting was more active, often done at night with torches or during dense spawning runs. Weirs and traps were passive but highly effective, especially during migrations, allowing for the capture of large quantities of fish with less active effort once built. Lewis and Clark, during their expedition, marveled at the scale and ingenuity of these structures. Describing a Shoshone weir on the Lemhi River in August 1805, Clark noted it was formed of sticks and rocks across the river, designed to funnel fish into traps. Later, on the Columbia, they witnessed even larger, more complex weirs essential for the massive salmon harvests of the Pacific Northwest tribes. The sheer volume of fish that could be caught using nets and weirs made effective preservation absolutely essential. A large catch left unprocessed would quickly spoil. This is where methods like large-scale smoking on extensive racks or communal drying efforts became critical, ensuring the bounty wasn't wasted and could sustain people through leaner times. Netting and trapping represent a shift from opportunistic individual catches to more systematic harvesting. While requiring more initial investment in time and materials for nets or construction for weirs, these methods provided a more reliable and abundant food source when conditions were right, showcasing a sophisticated understanding of aquatic ecosystems and engineering principles learned and adapted in the wild. Number 4, the subtle art of stunning and poisoning. This next technique treads into murkier waters, both literally and figuratively. It involves methods that temporarily stun or incapacitate fish, making them easy to gather by hand or with a simple net. These weren't widespread sport fishing methods, but in a survival situation or when needing to catch elusive fish in murky water, they were employed, often relying heavily on specific, sometimes dangerous, local knowledge. Many Native American tribes possessed sophisticated knowledge of local flora, including plants that contained natural pesticides. substances toxic to fish, but generally harmless to humans when the fish was cooked. The Cherokee, for example, were known to use crushed black walnut hulls. The green hulls contain juglone, a chemical that depletes oxygen in the water when introduced in sufficient quantity, effectively suffocating fish in a contained area like a slow-moving pool or dammed-off section of a stream. Similarly, buckeye nuts were sometimes crushed and thrown into the water. The saponins in buckeyes interfere with a fish's ability to absorb oxygen through its gills. This wasn't about poisoning the water source long-term, but about temporarily affecting a small, contained area to harvest stunned fish that floated to the surface. Identifying the correct plants, knowing the right dosage, and understanding which water bodies were suitable, slow, contained areas worked best, was critical knowledge passed down through generations. A less chemical, more physical method involved concussion. If a frontiersman knew fish were hiding under a specific rock overhang or submerged log, a sharp, heavy blow delivered to that rock with a large stone or heavy club could sometimes stun the fish underneath. The shock wave through the water temporarily disorients them, causing them to float out into the open, where they could be quickly scooped up. This required precise knowledge of fish hiding spots and a good deal of luck, but used minimal resources. Beyond the plants themselves or a heavy rock club, the main gear here was knowledge, and perhaps a basket or dip net to collect the stunned fish quickly before they recovered or drifted away. Containment, like building a temporary rock dam downstream, could also improve success rates when using plant-based methods. These methods are less frequently detailed in mainstream historical accounts compared to angling or spearing, perhaps because they were less common, more localized, or even viewed with suspicion by some. Using plant poisons, especially, required absolute certainty in plant identification, as using the wrong plant could be ineffective or dangerously contaminate the catch or the water. It highlights the frontiersman's reliance not just on tools, but on deep ecological knowledge, often borrowed directly from indigenous peoples who had mastered these subtle techniques over millennia. It was a reminder that survival sometimes meant using every trick in the book, even the less conventional ones. While effective for catching, these methods, particularly plant poisoning, could impact more than just the target fish in a small area. Their use was likely situational and not a daily practice, reserved for specific needs or locations. Number 5. Tickling and hand gathering, the bare-handed approach. Perhaps the most intimate and surprising technique is one that requires no gear at all, just patience, stealth, and a sensitive touch. Trout tickling, or more broadly, hand-gathering fish. This ancient method, practiced in various forms across the world, relies on understanding fish behavior and exploiting their tendency to seek shelter. This method is most famously associated with trout, which often rest under undercut banks, beneath rocks, or among submerged roots in streams. The fishermen would wade slowly and carefully into the water, often downstream of the suspected hiding spot, minimizing disturbance. Reaching gently under the bank or rock, the goal was to locate the fish by touch. The key was slow, non-threatening movement. Once the fish was located, the fisherman would begin to gently tickle or stroke the fish's underside, moving slowly towards the head. This strangely seems to have a calming or hypnotic effect on some fish, particularly trout. With the fish relaxed, a sudden, firm grip behind the gills or around the body, followed by a quick toss onto the bank, secured the catch. It sounds almost mythical, but it's a documented technique requiring incredible patience and a delicate touch. Simple hand gathering was effective in specific situations. During droughts, fish might become concentrated in shrinking pools, making them easier to corner and catch by hand. Similarly, fish caught in weirs or natural traps could often be simply scooped out. After using stunning methods, like concussion or plant pesticides, as mentioned earlier, gathering the incapacitated fish was done by hand or with a simple basket. Success in hand gathering relied heavily on knowing where to look. Understanding fish behavior, where they rest during the heat of the day, where they hide from predators, how they react to disturbance, was paramount. This deep ecological knowledge was often perfected by Native American tribes who lived intimately with their local waterways. Frontiersmen learned through observation, trial and error, or direct instruction. The beauty of this technique is the near absence of gear. The fisherman's own hands, senses, and knowledge of the environment were the primary tools. Perhaps a bag or basket to carry the catch was the only accessory. While requiring specific conditions, clear water, accessible hiding spots, relatively calm fish, hand gathering represents the ultimate in low-impact, resourceful fishing. It's a technique that speaks to a deep connection with the natural world, a quiet confidence born from understanding rather than technology. Though perhaps not a primary method for securing large amounts of food, it was a valuable skill for opportunistic catches or when other gear was lost or damaged. It's easy to imagine a lone trapper checking his lines, noticing a flicker under a bank, and taking a few moments to try his luck with bare hands. A small victory won through pure skill and patience. Number 6. Fishing through the ice. Winter sustenance. When winter locked the rivers and lakes in ice, the waters beneath still held life, and resourceful frontiersmen found ways to reach it. Ice fishing wasn't just a casual activity, it was a necessary, often arduous method for obtaining fresh food during the leanest months, again drawing heavily on techniques perfected by northern Native American tribes. The first challenge was accessing the water. Lacking modern augers, frontiersmen relied on heavy, sharp tools. An axe could be used, but chopping a sufficiently large hole through thick ice was exhausting and inefficient. More specialized were ice chisels or spuds, long poles tipped with a sharp, heavy metal point. These could be forged by a blacksmith or sometimes improvised. Pounding this chisel repeatedly would gradually chip away the ice, creating a hole large enough to fish through. Keeping this hole from refreezing required periodically clearing away newly formed ice. Fishing gear was often simple. Short handlines of sinew or horsehair were common, sometimes attached to a short stick for easier handling. Hooks could be the gorge hooks mentioned earlier, or perhaps small, barbless hooks made from bone or traded metal. Lures were often crafted to attract fish in the dim light beneath the ice. Small, carved pieces of wood or bone, perhaps painted or adorned with a bit of fur or feather to mimic minnows or insects, were jigged up and down. Bait, if available, like preserved grubs or scraps of meat, could also be used. Knowing where to cut the hole was crucial. Indigenous knowledge played a huge role here. Experienced fishermen understood where fish congregated in winter, often in deeper pools near underwater structures or where currents brought potential food. They could read the ice and snow conditions to infer what lay beneath. The technique often involved jigging, rhythmically moving the lure or baited hook up and down to attract attention. Sometimes multiple holes might be cut and lines set, requiring the fishermen to move between them, checking for bites in the frigid air. Patience and tolerance for extreme cold were essential. Ice fishing provided a vital source of fresh protein when terrestrial game might be scarce or difficult to hunt in deep snow. It was particularly important in northern regions where winters were long and severe. While demanding and often uncomfortable, success meant a welcome break from dried rations. It required specific tools, knowledge of fish behavior in winter, and the sheer hardiness to endure hours out on the frozen expanse. Think about the conditions we explored in our episode on surviving a Rocky Mountain winter. Ice fishing was one more tool in that harsh survival kit. Fish caught through the ice could be immediately consumed or easily preserved by simply letting them freeze solid in the ambient cold, providing a ready supply for later meals. Number 7. Reading the water. The ultimate skill. This final technique isn't a specific method of capture like the others, but rather the foundational skill that made all other techniques possible, the ability to read the water and understand the ecosystem. Without this deep ecological literacy, often learned through years of experience and observation, or passed down through indigenous teachings, all the spears, hooks, and nets in the world would be far less effective. Native American tribes, living in balance with their environments for millennia, possessed an unparalleled understanding of their local waterways. They knew the seasonal movements of different fish species, their preferred habitats, riffles, pools, undercut banks, weed beds, their feeding times, and how weather patterns affected their behavior. They could read subtle signs, the type of insects hatching, the clarity of the water, the presence of predator birds, to predict where fish might be found. Frontiersmen who paid attention, observed carefully, and were open to learning from indigenous experts gained a significant advantage. Reading the water meant knowing where to cast a line, set a trap, or stalk with a spear. It meant understanding that trout might seek shaded, oxygenated water in the summer heat, while catfish might favor deeper, slower pools. It meant recognizing the V-shaped wake of a feeding fish or the subtle dimple of a rise. It involved knowing which baits or lures would be most effective based on the natural food sources available at that time of year. It meant understanding how rain might muddy the water and push fish towards the banks, or how a cold snap might drive them deeper. The primary gear here was the frontiersman's own senses: sight, hearing, even touch, feeling the current or bottom structure, coupled with his accumulated knowledge and intuition. His brain was the ultimate tackle box. The journals of explorers like Lewis and Clark are filled with observations about the abundance or scarcity of fish in different locations and at different times, reflecting their constant assessment of the environment. While they didn't always detail how they read the water, their success or failure in catching fish often hinged on being in the right place at the right time, guided by this ecological understanding. There are countless unwritten stories of frontiersmen surviving lean times because they knew how to find fish when game was scarce, relying not on luck, but on their ability to interpret the river's secrets. Imagine a trapper, low on supplies, scanning a river bend, noting the way the current flowed around a fallen log, and knowing instinctively that a deep pool likely held fish. That knowledge was as valuable as his rifle. This wasn't a trick or a gadget. It was a holistic understanding, a deep literacy of the aquatic world. It tied all the other techniques together, guiding their application and ultimately determining success or failure. It was perhaps the most vital and most easily forgotten technique of all. So there you have it. 7 forgotten ways the inhabitants of the frontier coaxed life from the waters. From the primal thrust of a fire-hardened spear to the patient sensitivity of a handline, from the communal effort of building a weir to the solitary focus of fishing through ice. These weren't just ways to catch fish. They were expressions of resilience, ingenuity, and a profound connection to the natural world. They were skills honed in the unforgiving crucible of the frontier, where failure wasn't an option. Many of these techniques, born of necessity and perfected over generations, often through vital exchange with Native American communities, have faded into obscurity, replaced by modern technology. But remembering them isn't just about historical curiosity. It's about appreciating the depth of knowledge, the resourcefulness, and the sheer determination it took to survive and thrive in wild America. It reminds us that the most valuable tools aren't always the ones you buy, but the ones you craft, the knowledge you carry, and the respect you hold for the environment that sustains you. Whether it was building a cabin strong enough to withstand the elements like we explored in Mastering the Wilderness, crafting the tools needed for daily life, or understanding the secrets of the river, survival depended on mastery. Thanks for joining me on this journey back to the waterways of the past. Keep exploring, keep learning, and never lose that connection to the wild. My name is Sam, and this has been Wild America.